Welcome to the New Wealth Wave podcast hosted by Dr. Joaquin Wallace. We're diving deep into the intricate layers of the 7-stage generational wealth model to offer invaluable insights on legacy building, wealth accumulation and preservation, and financial growth across generations. I'm Dr. Joaquin Wallace, and this is the New Wealth Wave podcast. Hey, future wealth builders. Welcome to another episode of the New Wealth Wave podcast. I am your host, Dr. Joaquin Wallace, and today our focus will be stages 1 and 2 of my 7-stage generational wealth model. And to help lead the discussion will be Jaelyn Vickery, LSW, a clinical and financial therapist specializing in financial psychology and disordered consumption. She helps individuals transform their relationships with food, money, and identity for lasting well-being. Through Dimensional Wealth LLC and her Finance Fitness Finesse podcast, she empowers others to break compulsive consumption cycles using her momentum methodology, integrating financial therapy with mental health to align decisions with personal values. Jaylen, welcome to the studio.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so happy to be here.
If this is your first time tapping into the New Wealth Wave podcast, it is based on my 7-stage generational wealth model. The model focuses on 3 phases, the past, present, and future, broken down into 7 stages. So let's get into it. Stage 1 is our internal and external ecosystem, walls in and walls out. It sets the foundation for our financial journey. Stage 2, financial genetic code, where we focus on our financial traumas and anxieties, both byproducts of stage 1. Both of these stages are related to our past. Now, Jaylen would help lead the discussion in stages 1 and 2. Stage 3, financial healing. We begin the healing process, reprogram our financial genetic code. Stage 4, financial edification. This is where we focus on both financial literacy and financial inclusion. Stage 5, financial well-being. We all want to achieve this, focusing on not outliving our income. Financial health equals financial wealth. We all want a soft landing. Stage 6, generational knowledge. This stage provides us with the blueprint to properly transfer our knowledge and assets to create our financial footprints, which leads us to stage 7, generational wealth. Stages 5, 6, and 7 can be recognized as our future. However, depending on your entry on the model, your presence is a stage that you are currently entering. 10 toes down, boots on the ground. That's the stage you're entering in. So, Jaylen, before we get into the heavy lifting, tell us a fun fact about yourself.
I appreciate this question. So, a fun fact about myself, it stems from my decade plus of experience in training to play Division I athletics. And that is that I am obsessed with challenging the mind and body connection. And that to say, after college athletics, I was still obsessed with the training aspect of living. So I trained for my first marathon, and now I'm training myself to do a handstand. So I'm pretty determined to be that old lady that can do anything. So that's a fun fact about me.
So you're very, very competitive. That's the D1 spirit. I understand. I used to be a former athlete as well. Coached as well, so I get it. I am so competitive.
Yeah, you know.
Yeah, you know it. I know what time it is. I am so competitive. You know, I always say to my clients, always win the day, right? That's the first thing you need to do is win the day. So Jaylen, you had a chance to review the model. What was your initial thoughts?
To start out, I'm so thankful we connected because evolution does not happen unless if we are able to learn from and collaborate with others, especially people such as yourself, Dr. Wallace, of finding different strategies and perspectives and understanding ourselves, especially when it comes to our money. So the 7-stage generational wealth model, it's really cool because it's all encompassing of the ebbs and flows of the human experience and really centers on the importance of embracing self-awareness for meaningful change. I mean, generational wealth, it starts with generational knowledge. You can't pass down what you don't understand, and that's what the wealth model really helps people do. Finding those aspects where you can really be real and channel that self-awareness is something that the wealth model brought to my attention. So I really appreciated it.
Thank you for that. So before you became an advocate of financial healing and education, where are you currently on the model?
Yeah, so this was interesting because I just graduated with my master's degree in social work in December of 2024, and I'm 23, almost 24. So I've had a very interesting flow that has been different from some of my peers in regards to where I find myself at on the model. I would say before I became an advocate of financial education, I had probably freshly moved from stage 1 to stage 2. I spent so much time going into college because of the gift of my athletic scholarship, but also feeling bound to the monetary value of what that could pay for, which is my education. But I spent a lot of time combating outside influences of partying, college athletics, and how we spend our time off to the money and where we put it culturally to fit in. So yeah, freshly moving between stage 1 and 2, it caused a lot of self-reflection having to look at that model.
I appreciate that, especially being an athlete. It's always difficult. You're rather young, so, I would have suspicion you would be on stage 1 moving to stage 2. Listen, we've had people my age, 59, 60, 62 and older, basically saying that they're navigating and constantly oscillating between each stage of the model. And that's the beauty of it, because you can be at one point going clockwise, another point going counterclockwise. As I said earlier, it's basically boots on the ground where your entry point is, the model itself. But the main thing is we're always navigating the model. We're never off of the model. And that's one thing that we have to understand. We're never removing ourselves from it. We're constantly navigating and negotiating the various stages that we have. So with that being said, what was your aha moment that change was imminent?
Yeah, I appreciate that question. And it's caused me to really be patient with the different aha moments that I know I'll have throughout my life. But for me, when I knew change was imminent regarding to change in finding a way to engage with personal finance that wasn't so intimidating, I feel like there's a big avoidance factor that goes on when you're in your young adult years where you're still like, okay, do I let go of my childhood and really take everything on my own? And that was something I had to face after graduating with my bachelor's degree. I was on my own for the first time. I mean, I'm really thankful for that. My parents gave a little bit of a sink or swim mentality of kind of like pushing me into the water, but we were taught to rise up to the challenges that we face. And for me, it was rent being due and the same amount being in my bank account, maybe even $100 or less. So I was like, I'm not going to be able to afford anything until I really face the intimidation of thinking I'm not going to be good at understanding money. So financial anxiety and doubt tried to creep in post graduating and trying to find a way to afford my basic needs. But my aha moment was deciding to find a job in banking so I could learn about the basics of personal finance.
We had a guest, Brian Thomas, and he mentioned the fact that, our children are financial passengers. As we're driving the car, our children are there, and eventually we have to prepare them to move on, like you said. And for the most part, it's good. But again, on the other side of it, as you mentioned earlier, the anxiety does kick in because you don't have the support of your parents doing the things that they used to do. But it's something that needs to happen, because if not, you would constantly be relying on your parents and you can't break that chain. So I'm glad you was able to recognize that and move on, because you're doing well right now. I follow you on LinkedIn. You're doing a lot of great things. You're speaking all over the place and became highly recommended. And we had a chance to talk prior to, and we had some things in alignment. I'm really fortunate to have you come onto the show itself. So Future Wealth Builders, please find us on Apple, YouTube, Spotify, and all the major social media platforms. Today, we're thrilled to welcome Jaelyn Vickery, LSW, a clinical and financial therapist specializing in financial psychology and disordered consumption. She helps individuals transform their relationship with food, money, and identity for lasting well-being. So, question number 1. From your perspective, what exactly is disordered consumption, and how does it show up in ways beyond just spending money or eating habits?
Disordered consumption, it's a compulsive, excessive, or avoidant relationship with resources, typically driven by our emotional, psychological, or societal factors, rather than channeling actual need and values. To put it briefly, it goes beyond food. It can include hoarding your time, such as overcommitting or avoidance of productivity. We are definitely social beings, so we can experience disordered consumption of validation, that it can be compulsive social media use, needing external approval, being a people pleaser, a yes man, almost to your detriment. Disordered consumption can also include impulse-driven behaviors. That's gambling, even overworking, obsessive collecting of things, obsessive scrolling. And there's also an aspect of emotional withholding within disordered consumption. And that can include self-deprivation in our finances, in our sense of self, our relationships, or even neglecting and avoiding different responsibilities for our physical health.
Interesting. Never really heard of the concept. So again, when I did my research on you, I was like, this is going to be something different. Definitely it is applicable, and it does correlate with the 7-stage generational wealth models, but in particular stages 1 and 2. So I am excited to hear and talk to you and let our listeners basically hear from your expertise in this as well. So another question for you. Can you explain how disordered consumption intersects with the 8 dimensions of wealth and why emotional, mental, or spiritual wealth is often overlooked in this conversation?
Absolutely. And I appreciate you highlighting this, Dr. Wallace, because our consumerism psychology is literally being used against us every day, not even just with our phones, but in all the different marketing that we see everywhere. I mean, you can't look over your shoulder and not have something being shoved down your throat in regards to buy, consume, consume, consume. Don't miss out, the FOMO effect. Our consumerism psychology has such a major impact on our overall well-being because in order to consume, you also need money. And sometimes that can come from being a overconsumer of debt and not really understanding it. And I bring that up because the 8 dimensions of wealth, I came up with an acronym for it. The acronym is 5 reps. Okay, so the acronym is financial, intellectual, vocational, emotional, relational, environmental, physical, and spiritual. And as you can see at the top of the acronym is financial, intellectual, and vocational. Those are the top 3 dimensions that we are constantly chasing: our money, our intellectual status that could have to do with going to school, and then our vocation. So we're so busy pursuing money, status, and our job that we end up neglecting the center and the bottom dimensions, which is our emotional, our relationships, and even our environment. That is the center of clarity and focus. And it's so critical that we understand that wealth is nothing without wellness. We have to learn how to holistically invest in ourselves. And emotional, mental, and spiritual wellness is always going to be overlooked because society equates success with material accumulation rather than our holistic well-being.
That's interesting because I firmly believe that the way that financial literacy is being taught today is more of a linear process, more so of a holistic process. And that's why when the model was developed, that's why it's in a circular fashion in the structure of it, starting from stage 1 all the way to stage 7. And it shows that you can navigate back and forth, as we mentioned earlier, oscillating back and forth. And in particular, I love how you touched on the fear of missing out. Those are external aspects of when you look at my model, stage 1, walls in and walls out. Walls out is that fear of missing out. What society says, Maslow's 5 hierarchy of needs, your social environment, things of that nature, self-actualization. All of those things do make a big difference in our relationship with money. And those 8 acronyms, could you go over them again one more time for our listeners?
Absolutely. Yeah, I can go over it again because it can be a lot to take in, but that's what the human experience is. We are not one-dimensional beings, so don't try and be that because it's only going to cause more distress in the long run. The acronym for the dimensions of wellness is 5 reps: financial, intellectual, vocational, emotional, relational, environmental, physical, and spiritual. When you neglect one, you're going to neglect others. So if you're wondering why you're not having the financial success, the success in your job, or even in your focus and clarity, it's probably due to neglect in other areas of your life.
Future Wealth Builders, 5 reps. Remember that. You can always rewind this podcast, or you can hit Jaylen up as well, and she can give you that information. You can hit her up on LinkedIn, all her socials. We'll have that at the end of the podcast. Another question for you. So what are some common red flags or behaviors that signal someone may be stuck in a disordered financial or consumption cycle, even if on the outside things look stable?
So we are social beings. We learn socially, and our innate survival mechanism that goes along with our consumerism psychology is the desire to belong in a tribe. So anything around the lines, just as a disclaimer regarding disordered consumption versus mindful consumption that we'll get into a bit more later, is understanding that we do have to consume to survive. We do have to be aware of our social dynamics with others because we survive in numbers. You can't survive alone. And so some of these red flags that can show that you may be stuck in a cycle of disordered financial or consumption can look like compulsive behaviors. That's constant shopping, binge eating, or obsessive saving. In my previous research I published with the university this past year on eating disorders and financial strain, it was a 12-month study where I studied what that cycle of compulsiveness of consuming really comes from. Because we interact with food and money every day, but we don't really acknowledge the other things that we can have compulsive tendencies towards. So I want to highlight real quick the C3 cycle that happens in the human experience of consuming. It starts with a compulsion, then leads to consumption, all in order to control. So we really want to control those underlying feelings of anxiety, overwhelm, distress, lack of fulfillment. We try to control those so then we get a compulsion to get that quick fix. We are dopamine junkies, Dr. Wallace, and that's where compulsiveness comes from. And the dopamine is part of our survival mechanism. So as you're trying to control the distressing feelings, our brain wants something to solve quickly. So we have a compulsion to seek out something that can be engaging quick, but not necessarily lasting in regards to how we can consume effectively. So these compulsive behaviors that are a red flag, that constant shopping, scrolling, envisioning yourself having some sort of item so that you can get validation, binge eating in order to get that quick hit of dopamine, or even obsessive saving, which is a form of financial anorexia. Some other red flags to just point out as well are avoidance, emotional guilt or shame, drastic swings in overspending, then to extreme restriction as if you have to compensate or punish yourself, living for the short term, or also just feeling empty without consuming. You could feel restless for not getting any sort of external validation to feel okay, or you could feel restless not always having yourself stimulated by a screen. So those are some of them, but it really just comes down to an overall feeling of not having the energy or clarity to operate how you want to each day.
That's interesting because it really falls in alignment with behavioral finance. And that's why when you look at the linear model in regards to financial literacy, it doesn't really take into account the behavioral aspect of it all, which is so important because we make our decisions with regards to money, things that you mentioned earlier, is all about your emotions, your emotes, so to speak. Those are the decisions that's driving you to make your decisions financially. It can maybe learned helplessness, self-sabotage, coming from your walls in culturally, all the things that have been introduced to you, as I've always said, unbeknownst to you, generationally willed upon yourself. You carry this baggage on through life. And what you're speaking of speaks really to that as well, because again, at the end of the day, our decisions are based on emotions. We're not robots. So we're going to have some ups and downs in our decision making. And that's why I firmly believe that literacy is not linear. And so today, what you're hearing in terms of the media is two words in specific: financial literacy, generational wealth. Well, as you mentioned earlier, generational wealth begins with generational knowledge, right? We have to have the knowledge to create the wealth. If we don't have that, it's going to be a difficult challenge for us. Not many people understand that. The knowledge is more than books and information and theories. It really comes into play as well, the emotional side. So important. The financial trauma, anxieties, walls in, walls out. We have no financial healing. So all of that is so important to understand that first. And what you're speaking of ties directly into that as well. That's a great point, Jaylen. Good job.
Absolutely. I like to add on to that real quick as well to acknowledge the fact that, I have a clinical background in behavioral health, clinical psychology, working in clinical therapy, and I decided to specialize in aspects of consumer finance and consumer psychology later. But emotions last an average of 90 seconds. And when you base your decisions off of these quick, fleeting emotions, that's what leads to a scarcity mindset. That's what leads to some of those limiting beliefs as to why you maybe feel you don't have control or don't have enough time, or you're not able to really be disciplined in your sense of self. And that leads to an overall feeling. The feelings that you have about yourself, your abilities, your capabilities around your money, especially generationally, feelings are the product of emotions mixed with experiences. And disordered consumption comes from you relying on those quick doses of emotions, especially negative ones that we can be negatively biased towards. It leads to the overall experience and longevity of a feeling of inadequacy. So I really appreciate you highlighting that.
That's excellent. So many people use money, food, or material goods to self-soothe or self-medicate, I always say. What root causes typically drive this kind of emotional consumption in your line of work?
Emotional consumption, spending our money is always associated with an emotion. Emotional spending is always based on the pile up of emotional experiences throughout the day. So I can break some of these root causes down further, but just to list them out: unresolved trauma from youth, or even just current little t micro doses of trauma you could be experiencing, low self-worth, scarcity mindset, stress and anxiety, maybe depressive symptoms, avoidance or disassociative symptoms, along with these cultural and social pressures that are really the driving force of a majority of the things we're talking about today.
Yeah, it directly attributes from stage one of the model, right? So, and that's why that's so important, the walls in and walls out. I typically say your parents are your first financial fiduciaries, and they learn from their parents. They learn from their parents. So this may be 70, 80 years of misinformation that was been, again, given to you, and you're carrying that on as well. So it's very important to recognize that, but we know that money is a topic that no one really talks about. We hold it close to the vest. So therefore, we're constantly carrying this on for years, and it seeps into our relationships as well, which is important because when you have a union of two people, you have different perspectives, different walls in, different walls out. Their stage ones are different, and they're now asked to become union. And as we know, many of the divorces or anxieties within a relationship stems from money, scarcity of resources, learned helplessness, self-sabotage. All of those beliefs seep into the relationship, and without any type of therapy that happens, it carries on and it affects their marriage as well too. That's some great information, Jaylen. When consumption shifts from necessity to harmful, how does that impact our overall well-being, and which dimensions of wealth takes the biggest hit first?
I appreciate this question, and I'm going to answer it tying in what you stated previously in regards to the evolution beyond stage 1 and 2. And that's really addressing our money narratives, our money schemas. Over, I believe it's 90 to 95% of our thoughts are cyclical, and they're also repetitive. So if you grew up in an environment where money wasn't talked about very often, or there were messages that were passed on that this is the only lifestyle that we're ever able to know, you have to always trade all your time for money, you're never going to be fulfilled at work, so you might as well just dive into what you're able to get. Things that align with the scarcity mindset, or even a money dysmorphic mindset of thinking that you have more money than you really do, and it actually damages your generational wealth. So when our consumption shifts from necessity to harmful, it impacts our overall sense of well-being by passing on messages that we're inadequate. We're not capable of taking care of ourselves holistically. We only live through that alarm clock in the morning and those couple cups of coffee, and not adequately nourishing ourselves to get through the day. And I bring that up because when we live the same Groundhog Day, that is a form of consumption. You're consuming the normalcy of a pattern just to avoid the underlying feelings that are going to take addressing stage 1 and 2, those deep money wounds, those deep wounds, and potentially just scar tissue that happens to us mentally from what we interact with growing up, no matter what your socioeconomic status is. The dimensions of wealth that take the biggest hit first when our consumption shifts from necessity to harmful is our mental and emotional wealth. So mental pertaining to the tie between emotional and intellectual. We feel that stress, that guilt or shame that then leads to impulsive choices, then just letting yourself fully immerse in, well, I already messed up, so I might as well just keep buying. I might as well just keep eating. I might as well just keep snapping off at someone because I don't have the energy to really pull myself out of it. The other dimensions that take a hit are financial, because if you don't have clarity, focus, a sense of inner peace in how you're able to navigate the other avenues of your life, your financial wealth is never going to get to where you want it to go. Another one that is so big, Dr. Wallace, when our consumption shifts from necessity to harmful, if you are someone who does find a lot of joy and energy and excitement in their work, that is amazing. But as even I continue to become busier, and I'm blessed because I have more opportunities to collaborate with people, I am not going to compromise my physical wealth. And for me, that's movement. That's going for my walks, making sure I'm working out, making sure I'm getting my sleep, no matter how much I want to stay up and keep consuming productivity, because that's something I'm pretty passionate about. But our health is wealth. So our physical wealth gets let go. And that's why we're seeing so many different types of sicknesses happening around our country from even just people who are really successful. And that ultimately takes a hit on our relationships too. So they're all interconnected, and it can be a lot to take in when you're like, I have all these aspects of me that I don't know how to manage them all. Well, that's where it takes acknowledgement, because you're living your life each day interacting with the dimensions, but you have to take the time to acknowledge and be a student of self, which things like the wealth model help you do.
I love how you tacked on health as wealth, because it is so important. No matter how much money you make, no matter how busy or productive you may seem to be, you always have to take time in your schedule to yourself to do some sort of physical activity. Using myself as an example, 6:30, I'm out, I run my 2 miles. I've been doing that for years. And that helps me in terms of my clarity for the day, because you have to do something that's going to help you be physically positioned, because at some point, as you mentioned earlier, you're going to become so busy, and that's one of the first things that goes. And I always tell a story. It was like 1993. I don't know, you weren't born, probably didn't know. You about 2001,
I
2002.
wasn't.
Yeah, because you're the
I'm a
same age
21st
as,
century
yeah,
baby.
you're the same age as my youngest daughter. So I was in the bank, and I had a gentleman in front of me, and he was with his caretaker, and I was behind him. He was in a wheelchair, and he had an oxygen mask, and he turned around to me and he said, no matter how much money I have, I would give it all up if I can have my health. And he said, take advantage of your ability that you can take care of yourself and have your welfare in front of you. And I never forgot that. And so I've always made sure that I take time out of my schedule. I need to always make sure that I can take 20 minutes out of my day in the morning to myself. 20 minutes. That's getting up, watching TV, that's laying in the bed. So if I get up at 6:30, I need to be out and gone, because by the time that person watches TV, whatever show it is they're watching, I'm home. And I need to take 20 minutes out of my schedule just for myself. It's not as difficult as it sounds. As you said, you have to have things in order. You have to make sure that's a priority. You have to be very intentional about that. Because as you know, if you don't take care of your health, wealth doesn't matter, right?
No, it doesn't.
It doesn't matter. So I'm glad you mentioned that, because oftentimes and not, we do forget that. So another question for you. How do family dynamics and early childhood environments contribute to the financial habits we carry into adulthood? And in what ways might these shape our financial genetic code?
Real quick, before I highlight that question and answer it, I do want to acknowledge that I love running. I love, like I said, moving my body. And the fact that Dr. Wallace still runs, there's a crazy statistic. It's like between 80 and 90% of people stop running after 30. So let me just say, like, that is awesome that you're still able to run and challenge your body in that way. So any of y'all who are, fellow 21st century people like me, and you're not moving your body, just going for a walk, there's so many benefits to your overall health and wealth in all the dimensions. So thank you for bringing that up and sharing that story. In regards to the ways that family dynamics and our early childhood environments contribute to our financial habits we carry into adulthood and how it can shape our financial genetic code, I do want to pull something from that question, and it talks about our environments. That is why environmental wealth is one of the dimensions. When people think about environmental wellness, they're like, just having things be kind of clean and combating climate change. And while that's important, it's way more than that. Your environment has to do with your immediate living space, how you organize it and how you keep it so that you're able to navigate all aspects of your life. But even then, as a child, you're in a home, and part of your environment are the relational and communication dynamics between you, your siblings, and especially whoever is caring for you. There are many instances that we may not even know how to fully acknowledge and understand the memory, which is why you listen to podcasts like this or seek out collaboration with a financial or clinical therapist to understand how our early experiences with scarcity or excess create ingrained beliefs. Scarcity mindset has to do with there's extreme cases where some people grow up and water and electricity get shut off because their parents can't afford it. And then you move up to maybe a little higher in a socioeconomic class, and parents are just saying, oh, at the store, like, you can't get that. We can't afford it. While they're still getting a full cart of groceries, but the kid just can't get whatever they want. And then there's even another level in the socioeconomic class where someone may get everything that they ever want. That's the excess of consumption, of giving. Even sometimes it's excess consumption where a parent is just trying to give the kid whatever they want to buy the relationship or also buy silence out of somebody. And that can cause negative ingrained beliefs. So I bring up some of those different examples because part of the disconnection between everyone in our society and culture, Dr. Wallace, is that we judge each other so harshly based on what we can see and what we think they're at in life in regards to socioeconomic class. And I'm challenging myself, and I challenge the listeners to be mindful of the different experiences that come with having different amounts of money and how that affects your well-being, how those family dynamics, the things that are said or not said, create those ingrained limiting beliefs as to how you can live your life into adulthood. Our parents' attitudes towards money become our subconscious blueprint for how we interact with it. That could be fear-driven saving, reckless spending, or again, just complete avoidance of those responsibilities. And our childhood trauma, I also want to identify that word because people attribute trauma to I saw someone get hit by a bus or die, or I was sexually assaulted as a kid. Like that's called big T trauma. Little T trauma are some of those micro-dosing negative interactions that happen. It could be parents fighting. It could be being at the store and watching your parents' credit cards get declined. That can all manifest into adulthood as compulsive spending, hoarding, or extreme frugality. And it shapes our genetic code. Ways that we can actually combat it from shaping our genetic code is to break that cycle. It requires us recognizing those inherited financial behaviors and consciously rewriting them. So being like, where am I at on stage 1 and stage 2 of the generational wealth model, for example?
That's so interesting because I write about that a lot in regards to the one aspect that many people don't realize is that when you give children everything they want in the beginning, those kids become financial hostages as well. Because now it's the carrot. Okay, if you do this, this is what you get. Or if you don't do this, you can't get this. And I've had clients that I've met with that is in that category, and they wind up just spending everything. They just spend everything because they don't want the money. Or on the other end of it, as you mentioned, they become financially frugal. You know, they understand that what they have in their beliefs that, well, if I do this, it's tied to this. It's tied to my parents liking me. It's tied to people, wanting to be around me because those are the scripts that they have been, again, unbeknownst to them, given to them. And the parents think that they're doing a good thing for them. In actuality, they're actually tying their hands behind their back. They're actually hurting them as well. So that's a great
Yeah.
point. Future Wealth Builders, find us on Apple, YouTube, Spotify, and all major social media platforms. Today, we're thrilled to welcome Jaelyn Vickery, LSW, a clinical and financial therapist specializing in financial psychology and disordered consumption through Dimensional Wealth LLC and her Finance Fitness Finesse podcast. She empowers others to break compulsive consumption cycles using her momentum methodology, integrating financial therapy with mental health to align decisions with personal values. Another set of questions for you. So, what role does shame play in keeping people stuck in consumption cycles, especially in communities where survival, not wealth building, was the focus for generations?
So what role does shame play? First, let's talk about where does shame come from? It has to come from some sort of judgment or comparison to something, right? We have to get feedback or make an assumption about feedback we are taking from our environment. And that has to do with interaction with other human beings as to why we, for whatever reason, were not enough in that moment. And the role that shame plays in keeping people stuck in consumption cycles, especially in those communities where survival is the focus rather than wealth building, I believe it comes from that generational trauma. There is a lot of history between all different races. And I bring up races as in minorities, non-minorities, like whatever background that you come from. And I mean, I'm a blend of both. I'm biracial. So there's generational trauma on both sides that I have a lot to learn about. And within that generational trauma, shame can often be passed down through our generations focused on survival and not wealth building. And that can actually even be passed on physiologically. There is unspoken pain that is passed down, and that has to do with, why am I so anxious? Oh, well, my mom was always anxious. Why am I so pessimistic? Well, it's because my dad was so pessimistic. Though some of those are coping mechanisms for that shame that we experience in different interactions, especially with money. There's a huge avoidance factor just because people think, well, I'm not a guy, so I'm not supposed to understand money. Or I lost a ton of money at one point in my life and I carry that shame. Therefore, I can never try to build my generational wealth again. And that can even be passed down through an inherited scarcity. There's many communities that are facing financial struggles, and it creates a cyclical internalized fear of lack. Like, this is just how it is. And so there's nothing that we can do about it. And that can be reinforced through the media as well. And above all, shame, it just keeps people stuck. The shame about our financial mistakes or not having enough, it prevents our proactive growth. I know even for me as a student athlete, I felt a lot of shame for not always being super happy while I was competing. Yet I was basically getting paid 60 grand a year because I had school paid for. So while I have this number that's above my head, I was associating my net worth with my self-worth. And that overall just led to chronic shame that was debilitating.
You know, you talk about shame. Sandra Davis, she was one of our episodes, and she said something that was so significant, which I firmly believe in. You know, oftentimes financial literacy can be a shaming mechanism as well, because it points the finger on what you're not doing. You're not doing this, you're not doing that. So we're not looking at the circumstances of that individual. Therefore, the theory of financial literacy is not a cookie cutter type of product, a model. And oftentimes that's what it's viewed upon. So you have to meet people where they're at. So I do agree that the shaming is so critical in that aspect, but financial literacy can play a part in financial shaming as well. So Jaylen, for young adults, athletes, or high performers, what are some unique challenges they face regarding money management and consumption pressure?
This question really hits home for me because, as I'm sure some of you have picked up, I was a collegiate athlete. I played softball at the University of Illinois, started right when COVID hit. So I had my first season even canceled and came back and was all conference. And I bring that up because I committed to play college softball. Like, I committed to Illinois verbally when I was 15 years old. And I was technically late to the game. I mean, I was on an elite travel team that had girls when they were 13 committing to SEC schools. And so I knew that playing college softball meant going to school, meant having school paid for. I have several siblings that were all going to be in college at the same time. So I needed to get a really good scholarship to get an education. And there are even more extreme measures than my case, where some young athletes, or even just very assertive and high achieving young adults in different talented specialties, we are told to completely rely on our talent to quote unquote make it, to make it out sometimes. And most of our talents start from a place of passion. They start from a place of pure joy and interacting with something that gives you life. But when your purpose is assigned to you based on solely what you're good at, and because that's your purpose, that's now the way that you make money, that's the way that you make a name for yourself, it just negatively compounds pressure and it eats away at our sense of self. I mean, when I was 15, I didn't realize that by committing to play Division 1, I was signing away parts of myself that I hadn't even discovered yet. And what that led to when I got to college was I have to completely conform to whatever identity helps me fit in the best and compete the best so I can remain adequate. And that led to identity-based spending. My financial decisions were tied to my performance or my status on my team. When the team wanted to go out to eat and then go and pregame and then go out to the bars, that's what we did. When other people in my environment, my teammates or my friends, fellow young adults, the trend was to get these major hauls of clothes and stuff from online and then show it off on Snapchat. That was all based in our identity that we had a lot. And it's the major impact of media, specifically social media. It brings in that distorted element of external validation. I mean, peer pressure and social comparison push overspending to an extremely unhealthy form of consumption, and it just leaves us feeling depleted. And then that leads to a pressure to maintain. Like I said, I graduated and had rent due, but I had the same amount in my bank account. And until I realized that I determine what pressure I apply to myself to maintain a stable way of life rather than trying to conform to a certain image, that was the only way to escape some of the toxic ways that peer pressure and external validation can cause our money management to just go south, especially into mid-adulthood and up.
It's interesting you say that because many people don't understand the pressure that athletes are on. They see it, they believe it, but being an athlete and going through that process, when I was an athlete, we didn't have social media. So we didn't have that type of pressure. But I seen it with my middle daughter. She's now 30. She ran at the University of Oregon, All-Americans, this, that, and the other. And it is a pressure in regards to that. But the one thing that we made sure that was clear for her, that as a family, she didn't have to rely on trying to be something that she was not. And as you mentioned earlier, I was an athlete that felt that my talent needed to take me out of my environment to get me to where I'm at today. For her, that was not the case because we was pretty stable. But when I grew up, that's what I used, getting out of the hood, so to speak, using my athletic talent. And I see it a lot with athletes now. And I do understand the pressures that follow them. And I look at some of the irrational decision making from a behavioral aspect, again, coming from scarcity of resources, things of that nature that does position them to make decisions or financial decisions that say, well, you know, that's not the smartest decision, but based on their ecosystem, they're taking from where they grew up and they believe that that's what is necessary because they're viewing rich. And I always say rich is transactional, wealth is a legacy. And oftentimes and not, we're chasing the dollar. So how does social comparison, especially in the age of social media, we just kind of talked about this, fuel disorder consumption and financial anxiety in ways we might not even realize?
Like you said, we touched on it a little bit, but the social media effect, it causes us to experience in a very untruthful way idealized portrayals of life that create false standards and financial insecurity. And a lot of the times you'll even step on college campuses and there will be these like, hey, get a free t-shirt. But in order to get the free t-shirt, you have to sign this form that signs you up for a credit card. And nobody's educated on it. But we're like, hey, look, I'm posting, I got my free t-shirt. And then you get this magic card in the mail that is free money, but you weren't told how it actually works. So in order to keep up with some of those false standards, you keep using that magic card, In regards to like NIL, name, image, likeness, it's where athletes have been able to now be sponsored by brands, and it has caused a complete change in the game. I mean, just having kids commit to play college very early, or even just the community pressures of, oh, what level athlete are you? It causes a distorted idea as to who am I and what's my worth, and how do I make sure that I look like I'm more successful so that I fit in. And in regards to NIL, like, I'm thankful to be sponsored by Insomnia Cookies, but when NIL first became a thing, some of my teammates were getting sponsored by bigger brands. So then I'm like, instead of focusing on the love of the game and competing, we're focused on who has the best sponsorships or who has this, who has that. And it's all in an effort to conform to a false standard of adequacy as to who you are in regards to your society.
I'm glad you was able to tie that in, because NILs have made a significant impact, as you mentioned, into the college sporting arena. That with the portal as well, people are now leaving because of NILs, because they can get more money in terms, you have the NIL, then you have the collective as well. Which one are you going to be involved with? It's evolving, with the coaching. The old school coaches anyway, they're finding themselves kind of out of the loop because they're not able to coach in that environment no more. There really isn't no loyalty as it once was prior. And so, as you mentioned earlier, it's not about the game now. In some cases it is, but not about the game all the time. It's how much am I getting paid and who is endorsing me? It's fueling, as you can see in college athletics today, in particular the larger sports, football, basketball, and softball and baseball is moving to that realm as well. Softball is a very popular sport, if you don't know, that's gaining a lot of traction as well. So, Jaylen, you work with individuals trying to reprogram deeply embedded financial behaviors. What are some of the first steps you recommend to begin that process of healing and rewiring?
I appreciate this question. Some of the first steps so that you can begin healing and rewiring some of those negative or maybe overly positive financial behaviors you may have about yourself is self-awareness. As I stated before, a huge aspect that we are missing right now in living a truly intentional life is completely surrendering to hustle culture and surrendering to it in a way where you're just so go, go, go. You're not able to really center yourself in what you're actually feeling. And that's a form of avoidance rather than channeling skills of self awareness so that you can really identify your emotional triggers, which could be stress or self-worth issues. If you're able to actually acknowledge your emotional triggers, then you're able to really deal with them. Once you are ready to stop avoiding your pain or stop invalidating your pain, then you can really deal with it. And you can deal with it ahead of time as if it's a preventative care measure for your well-being. So with that self-awareness, an exercise that I love to do each morning when I take my time for myself, it could be something you plug into your 20 minutes, is something I designed called an LBP, a limiting beliefs purge. And it is centered in a therapeutic technique called rational emotive behavior therapy. And that is all based on disputing your limiting beliefs. So, what is a limiting belief? It's some of those cyclical negative thoughts you have about yourself. It can be something even just fleeting, like you're not getting something done and you're like, I'm not organized enough. I'm not disciplined enough. I'm not smart enough. Those intrusive thoughts that come up because we can't control what we think, but we can acknowledge them and pull what we value from them. So with this LBP, it takes 5 minutes. I set a timer for 60 seconds. And I write down every limiting belief that I'm currently having about myself. And for me, a lot of the time that has to do with productivity dysmorphia. So I'm writing, I don't have enough time. I'm not organized or disciplined enough. I didn't stick to my priorities. I'm not good enough. I write out those limiting beliefs for 60 seconds. Timer goes off. For the last 4 minutes, I acknowledge those thoughts. I lasso those limiting beliefs and I put them on paper. And for those 4 minutes, I study them. I study myself and I pull my LBP, my limiting beliefs tell me I value X. Typically for me, with that example, I'm not disciplined or organized enough. That tells me that I value the impact that I have on the world. I value time because time is an asset in my life. And I bring that up because in order to really begin the process of healing and rewiring your sense of self, your capability mindset, you have to learn to acknowledge those limiting beliefs, those negative thoughts, because they tell us what we truly value, which changes the relationship with the thought. I like to call it shedding mental weight. LBS is like the abbreviation for physical weight, for pounds. A lot of us are constantly trying to lose weight sometimes or change our body, but have you actually tried shedding some of the mental weight that has been piling on you for years? So the LBP is definitely an exercise that I recommend.
You know what? I may have to start using that one.
You should try it.
You know, you have a lot of acronyms, so I'm going to have to go back and rewind this episode and write some of those down as well. So great stuff so far. So Jaylen, if someone's listening feels like they've been living in survival mode financially or emotionally, what message would you want to leave them today?
Yeah. Well, thank you for everyone who tuned in. If you've been feeling like you're in survival mode financially or emotionally, and I have been there, one of the biggest things is changing your environment. And that can also incorporate movement. So making time for yourself to just go for a 20-minute walk with no technology, just taking in everything around you. That's just a way to separate yourself out of it. When we change our environment, we can really take in all factors that are influencing us being in survival mode. But say you don't have the opportunity to change your environment, I'd like to encourage you to find empowerment in how you actually want and vision your intentional life being, because you're not stuck. Healing starts with self-awareness and small changes. I like to call it microdosing momentum, because a lot of us wait around for motivation, and then we're even more pissed off at ourselves when we find ourselves sitting in the same place as we were a year prior. That's why you have to microdose momentum. Find the smallest action step that you can take for yourself to make meaningful change. And also have hope in the support, such as free resources like this podcast, like my podcast, F3 for short. There's hope in that support, in finding tools, communities, and resources like the generational wealth model to help you build a healthier relationship with yourself and your money. You need to find hope that time is your greatest asset, which is why you have to plug in now. Healing from financial trauma takes time, but the time's going to move past anyway. So you need to be proactive in utilizing it and leveraging it in your favor, because it is possible to move from survival to stable abundance.
Appreciate you saying that. We'd like to welcome Jaelyn Vickery on today's podcast. Has been outstanding. So our final question for you. Are you ready for it?
So ready. I'm not ready. I don't want it to be over.
We definitely have to bring you back because there's a lot more topics that we can touch on as well. But as we wrap up, what's the key message you want our listeners to take away from this conversation? And before we go, tell us about any upcoming projects or initiatives you're excited about. What's next for you?
Yeah. Thank you, Dr. Wallace. On my show, I call it it's Finance, Fitness, Finesse. And I say, hey, finessers, because we're all finessing at the end of the day. We're all finessing in our day-to-day. So to my finesser community, because we know Dr. Wallace is also a finesser with everything he's done, we are meant to consume to live. There's nothing wrong with you for consuming different things, but be mindful of how the consumption of each good is contributing to the good in your life, both in the short and the long term. That can really help with your decisions. Your limiting beliefs do not define you. They tell you what you value most. And I will also leave you with, if you truly want a rich life, you have to focus on building wealth with wellness, centered in intentional living. Some of the upcoming projects that I'm super excited about and would love to collaborate with you guys with, work with you if you're looking for someone to help you build your blueprint on how to be the architect of your life, please don't hesitate to reach out. Some of my upcoming projects, I'm getting ready to launch my website. It's going to include resources on how to build your own blueprint as the architect of your well-being and your abundant life. I'm continuing my research on disordered consumption, so be on the lookout for that. I hope to be back on the show to talk about the progression in it. Anybody who has specialties in different areas of consumption, because we consume a lot as human beings. I can't develop this on my own, so I'd love input. And season 3 of Finance, Fitness, Finesse is going to be dropping this summer. Dr. Wallace will be on my show at some point as well, so be sure to tune in. And don't forget to look at the show notes. A lot of people don't utilize that resource in podcasts, so be sure to check that out. I appreciate the show, and I appreciate you guys listening.
Well, you will be back on, so don't worry about that. I will accept your request for me to come on your show. I'm looking forward to that as well. And also tell the listeners your socials and your website, all of that, so we can tap that in and put that into the show notes as well, so they can reach out to you and schedule some appointments with you.
Absolutely. So my social media all across the board is at Jaelyn Vickery. I also have pages for my business, Dimensional Wealth, and Finance, Fitness, Finesse. My website is going to be jvic.com. That will be dropping here in a few weeks. So just find me at my name, Jaelyn Vickery, and you'll be able to navigate everywhere you need to go.
So Jaylen, on behalf of the New Wealth Wave podcast, my producer, Ray Haycraft, and I thank you for sharing your thoughts today. As we always say, generational wealth begins with generational knowledge, and I will see you on the next episode of the New Wealth Wave podcast. Thank you for joining us on the New Wealth Wave podcast, hosted by Dr. Joaquin Wallace. Our show is edited and produced by Ray Haycraft. To dive deeper into the world of financial wisdom and learn how to create your financial footprints, head to our website at www.drjwallace.com. For more updates and exclusive content, connect with us on social media by searching Dr. Joaquin Wallace. And if you have questions and comments, feel free to email us at thenewwealthwavepodcast@gmail.com. Remember, generational wealth begins with generational knowledge. And as always, thanks for listening. The content presented in this podcast is strictly for educational purposes and should not be taken as investment advice. The views and opinions expressed by our guests may not necessarily reflect those of the New Wealth Wave podcast and its host or producers. Listeners are urged to exercise discretion and judgment before making any financial or investment decisions. Always consult with a financial professional or advisor before taking any action based on the content of this podcast. If you're enjoying the New Wealth Wave podcast, we appreciate if you leave us a review. We're always open to topic suggestions and guest recommendations. Feel free to reach out to us directly with your thoughts and feedback. Thank you for tuning in, and we'll see you next time on the New Wealth Wave podcast.